Jeremiah Washington stared in disbelief as the flight attendant forcibly escorted him from his business class seat. His boarding pass clearly read 2A. Yet somehow, Trevor Whitman, a white executive, now occupied his spot. As security approached, Jeremiah quietly made a phone call. "It's happening again. Initiate Protocol Omega." Before we dive into this incredible story, I'd love to know where you're watching from. Drop your location in the comments, hit that like button, and subscribe to hear more stories about everyday justice. Ready to see how Jeremiah turns this situation around? Let's continue. Jeremiah's day had begun like any other high-stakes morning in his Houston penthouse. The sunrise painted golden streaks across his minimalist bedroom as his 5 a.m. alarm chimed. He moved with practiced efficiency. 15 minutes of meditation, 30 minutes on the treadmill, a protein-rich breakfast, and a quick scan of the financial markets on his tablet. Today was crucial, the culmination of 18 months of negotiations for a merger that would revolutionize the tech industry. As he adjusted his perfectly tailored Tom Ford suit in the mirror, Jeremiah couldn't help but reflect on his journey. Growing up in Chicago's South Side, he'd shared a 2-bedroom apartment with his mother and 3 siblings. His mother had worked 2 jobs to keep them afloat while insisting education was their ticket out. Her voice still echoed in his mind, "They can take your possessions, but never your knowledge." That knowledge had earned him a scholarship to MIT, where he'd graduated top of his class despite being one of only 8 black students in his program. He'd founded Washington Innovations from his cramped apartment with nothing but $5,000 in savings and an algorithm that would transform data processing. 12 years later, his company ranked among the Fortune 500, employing over 3,000 people. His phone buzzed with a call from Aisha Reynolds, his chief operating officer. "Morning, Jeremiah. The team in New York just confirmed everything set for the meeting. Davis and Powell sent over the final contract revisions at 2 a.m. Their lawyers must never sleep," Aisha said. "Did you review the changes?" Jeremiah asked, slipping on his watch, a vintage Patek Philippe that had been his first major purchase after securing series of funding. "Already done. They've conceded on the patent ownership structure, but they're still pushing for those acceleration clauses we discussed. Nothing unexpected." "Perfect. I'll review everything on the flight. Send me the presentation one more time. I want to make sure all the projections are updated. Already in your secure folder." "And Jeremiah? The Wall Street Journal is running that profile piece today. Your PR team says it's favorable." Jeremiah nodded, though Aisha couldn't see him. "Good to know. Though you and I both know favorable is relative when it comes to black executives. I'm sure they mentioned my surprising rise or unusual background at least once." "3 times, actually," Aisha chuckled. "But they also called you the most innovative mind in tech since Jobs. So there's that." After hanging up, Jeremiah double-checked his briefcase, laptop, tablet, portable charger, noise-canceling headphones, and multiple forms of identification. It was a habit born of necessity. Throughout his career, he'd learned that as a black man, he needed to be twice as prepared, twice as professional, and twice as documented as his white counterparts. His driver, Carlos, waited with the car when he reached the lobby. "Good morning, Mr. Washington. Flight still on schedule?" "Right on time, Carlos. Houston to JFK, then straight to the meeting." As they navigated through Houston's morning traffic, Carlos glanced at him through the rearview mirror. "My cousin works at the airport, sir. Says there's been more incidents lately. TSA giving certain folks a harder time, if you know what I mean." Jeremiah met his eyes in the mirror. "I appreciate the heads up, Carlos, but I've got my first-class ticket and TSA pre-check. Should be smooth sailing." Carlos nodded but didn't look convinced. "Just saying, sir. Sometimes doesn't matter what you got. Papers, money, status, some people only see one thing." Jeremiah absorbed the warning but pushed away the unease. He'd flown this route dozens of times without incident. His status as a high-tier frequent flyer typically insulated him from the indignities many other black travelers faced. At Houston International Airport, he breezed through the VIP check-in. The attendant smiled warmly, checking his bags through to New York and handing him his boarding pass for seat 2A, his preferred spot, reserved months in advance. "We've got you all set, Mr. Washington. Lounge access is available until boarding, and will begin boarding for premier passengers at 9:15. In the premium lounge, Jeremiah settled into a quiet corner with a coffee, reviewing the merger documents one final time. He was so absorbed that he almost missed the young man hesitantly approaching his table. "Excuse me, are you Jeremiah Washington?" Jeremiah looked up to see a young black man, perhaps in his mid-20s, clutching a worn laptop bag. "I am," he confirmed with a smile. "I'm sorry to interrupt you, sir. I'm Devin Taylor. I'm launching a startup, and your TED Talk on indigenous tech innovation literally changed my approach to everything. I just wanted to say thank you." Jeremiah stood, extending his hand. "No interruption at all, Devin. Tell me about your startup." For the next 15 minutes, he listened as Devin outlined an impressive platform for connecting minority farmers with urban markets. When they parted, Jeremiah had given Devin his business card with his private email. "Send me your pitch deck," he told the young entrepreneur. "I'm always looking for new investment opportunities." As he watched Devin walk away, Jeremiah felt the familiar weight of responsibility. Every interaction like this reminded him why visibility mattered. For young entrepreneurs like Devin, seeing someone who looked like them in positions of power wasn't just inspirational, it was transformative. With boarding time approaching, Jeremiah gathered his belongings, unaware that the smooth trajectory of his day was about to change dramatically. The premium lounge began emptying as first-class and business-class passengers were called for priority boarding. Jeremiah observed the subtle social choreography with a practiced eye, the way staff made more extended eye contact with white executives, the slightly warmer smiles, the small offers of additional assistance. These weren't overt actions but tiny differentials in treatment that, over a lifetime, Jeremiah had become attuned to noticing. He joined the priority boarding line, standing behind an older white couple who chatted amiably with the gate agent about their upcoming vacation in New York. When his turn came, the same gate agent's smile noticeably tightened. "Boarding pass and ID, sir," she requested, her tone shifting from conversational to procedural. Jeremiah provided both, watching as she scrutinized his identification for several seconds longer than she had for previous passengers. She glanced up at him, down at his ID, then back at her computer screen. "Business class to JFK, seat 2A, she finally confirmed, returning his documents. "Have a good flight, Mr. Washington." Jeremiah nodded and proceeded down the jetway. At the aircraft door, a flight attendant named Brenda, according to her name tag, greeted passengers. She smiled warmly at those ahead of Jeremiah, but her expression shifted when he approached. "Boarding pass, please," she requested, extending her hand. Jeremiah provided it, maintaining his professional demeanor. Brenda examined the pass, frowned slightly, then checked it against her tablet. "You're in 2A." Her tone carried an unmistakable note of skepticism. "That's correct," Jeremiah confirmed calmly. "May I see your ID as well?" Though the request was unusual. ID had already been verified at the gate, Jeremiah smoothly produced his driver's license. Brenda compared it to his face, then to his boarding pass, then checked her tablet again. "One moment, please," she said, stepping aside to consult with another flight attendant while keeping Jeremiah waiting at the entrance. The line behind him grew, with several passengers giving impatient sighs. Jeremiah felt the familiar pressure of being the cause of delay, despite it being entirely out of his control. It triggered memories from throughout his career, being asked for additional verification at corporate buildings where his white colleagues walked straight through, being mistaken for support staff during executive meetings, having his authority questioned by subordinates. After what felt like an eternity but was likely only 30 seconds, Brenda returned. "Everything appears to be in order, Mr. Washington. 2A is the second row on the right." Jeremiah nodded politely and made his way to his seat. The business class cabin was half full, with passengers settling in and flight attendants offering pre-departure beverages. He stored his briefcase in the overhead compartment and took his window seat in 2A. Across the aisle in 2B sat an elderly black woman who looked to be in her 70s. She caught his eye and smiled warmly. "Aren't you Jeremiah Washington?" she asked, her voice carrying the gentle cadence of the South. "My grandson works in tech, talks about you all the time. Says you're changing the game." Jeremiah smiled genuinely. "That's very kind of him. What's your grandson's name?" "Darius Williams. He's at that Google place in California." "Silicon Valley," Jeremiah nodded. "If he ever wants to talk career options, tell him to reach out. We're always looking for talent." The woman, who introduced herself as Dorothy, beamed with grandmother's pride. Their conversation was interrupted by a commotion at the front of the cabin. A white man in his 40s, wearing an expensive but slightly rumpled suit, was speaking with Brenda, gesturing at the seating chart on her tablet. "That can't be right," the man said, his voice carrying through the cabin. "I specifically booked 2A. I always sit in 2A." Jeremiah felt a prickle of unease as Brenda and the man, still standing in the aisle, both glanced in his direction. The man frowned, then leaned closer to Brenda, speaking in a lower voice that Jeremiah couldn't quite make out. Brenda nodded several times, then approached another flight attendant and the two conferred quietly. A moment later, the head flight attendant appeared, accompanied by a plainclothes man whose bearing and watchful eyes marked him as the air marshal. They approached Jeremiah's seat, while the man in the rumpled suit hung back, watching the scene unfold with apparent interest. "Mr. Washington," the head flight attendant, whose name tag read Kyle, addressed him. "Could you step into the jetway with us for a moment? There seems to be a seating issue we need to clear up." Dorothy across the aisle frowned. He was sitting here peacefully, minding his business. Kyle ignored her comment, focusing exclusively on Jeremiah. "Sir, if you could come with us, please. Just to clear things up." Jeremiah felt every eye in the business class cabin on him. He had two choices: create a scene by refusing, potentially reinforcing stereotypes about difficult black men, or comply and address the situation privately. With practiced calm that concealed his rising anger, he chose the latter. "Of course," he said, rising smoothly. "Though my boarding pass clearly indicates seat 2A. As he followed Kyle and the air marshal into the jetway, he noticed the white man, whose name he would later learn was Trevor Whitman, being ushered to wait near the front of the cabin. The last thing Jeremiah saw before exiting was Trevor glancing at seat 2A with an expression of satisfaction. The jetway felt eerily quiet compared to the bustle inside the aircraft. Kyle, the head flight attendant, stood flanked by the air marshal and Brenda, creating an implicit wall of authority. Two gate agents had also appeared, clipboards in hand. Jeremiah recognized the orchestrated power play. He'd used similar tactics himself in difficult negotiations, but understanding the strategy didn't make it less effective. "Mr. Washington, there seems to be a confusion with the seating arrangement," Kyle began, his tone professionally detached. "There's no confusion on my end," Jeremiah replied calmly, retrieving his boarding pass from his jacket pocket. "I booked seat 2A months ago, checked in yesterday, and was issued this boarding pass confirming my assignment to 2A. He held out the document, which Kyle glanced at without taking. "Yes, I understand that's what your boarding pass shows," Kyle said, "but our system is indicating a last-minute change. It appears there was an error in the booking system." "What specific error?" Jeremiah asked. The question caused a moment of hesitation. One of the gate agents stepped forward, a woman whose name tag identified her as Patricia Wells. Our premium passenger system sometimes duplicates seat assignments when there's a schedule change, Patricia explained. Your flight was moved up by 15 minutes last month, which might have triggered the glitch. Jeremiah reached for his phone. I have the original confirmation email, the schedule change notification, and my check-in confirmation from yesterday, all confirming seat 2A. He displayed each document in succession. The airline representatives exchanged glances. The digital system can sometimes reflect outdated information, Patricia continued. Our current manifest shows Mr. Whitman assigned to 2A. When was this change made? Jeremiah asked. Another uncomfortable pause. I don't have that specific information available, Patricia replied. Jeremiah kept his expression neutral, though internally his suspicion deepened. I'd like to see the current manifest, please. I'm afraid that's confidential airline information, sir, Kyle interjected. The jetway door opened, and a man in a pilot's uniform stepped out. The captain's 4 stripes gleamed on his shoulders as he assessed the situation with a quick glance. I'm Captain Sullivan, he said, addressing the group rather than Jeremiah specifically. We're approaching our departure window. What's the situation? Patricia quickly explained the seating confusion. Throughout her explanation, Captain Sullivan barely made eye contact with Jeremiah, focusing instead on his crew members. Mr. Washington, the captain finally said, turning to him but looking somewhere over his left shoulder, I understand your frustration, but ultimately, the airline has final discretion over seating assignments regardless of what was previously confirmed. We can offer you a seat in economy for this flight, and perhaps customer service can address compensation once we arrive in New York. Jeremiah noticed the subtle shift in language. From confusion and error to a unilateral decision about final discretion. He also noted that no one had asked Trevor Whitman to show his documentation or step into the jetway for questioning. With deliberate movements, Jeremiah activated the recording function on his phone. The action didn't go unnoticed. Sir, recording airline personnel is against company policy, Brenda said quickly. I'm not recording you, Jeremiah replied. I'm documenting my own experience as a customer. There's no law or valid policy preventing me from doing so. The air marshal shifted his stance slightly, moving his hand to rest near his hip in a subtle but unmistakable posture of potential intervention. Mr. Washington, Captain Sullivan said, his tone hardening, we're trying to resolve this amicably, but we're approaching our departure time. If we can't reach a quick resolution, we'll unfortunately need to continue this discussion with airport security, which would mean delaying the flight for all passengers. The threat was clear: accept what was happening or be labeled a security risk causing a disturbance. Jeremiah had seen this playbook before. The escalation of stakes to force compliance, the implicit suggestion that he was being unreasonable, the veiled threat of security intervention that carried far more danger for him than for a white passenger in the same situation. In that moment, Jeremiah made a strategic calculation. He could fight this battle here in the jetway and likely lose, possibly even being removed from the flight entirely, or he could appear to concede while activating a different kind of leverage. To be clear, he said, his voice steady, you're removing me from my confirmed business class seat to accommodate another passenger, despite my having all proper documentation, and you're offering me an economy seat as the only alternative if I want to make this flight. Captain Sullivan finally met his eyes. That's the situation, yes. We apologize for the inconvenience. I'll accept the economy seat under protest, Jeremiah said, emphasizing the last 3 words. And I'll expect this situation to be fully documented for further review. The relief among the airline staff was palpable. They'd expected more resistance. Thank you for your understanding, Mr. Washington, Patricia said, her professional smile returning. I'll escort you to your new seat. We found you an aisle in Economy Plus. As they turned to re-enter the aircraft, Jeremiah discreetly sent a text message to Aisha, discrimination incident on flight. Activate Protocol Omega. Full documentation. Walking through the business class cabin toward economy felt like a public humiliation ritual. He avoided making eye contact with Dorothy, whose expression of outrage was clear even in his peripheral vision. Trevor Whitman was now comfortably settled in seat 2A, typing on his laptop as if he belonged there. The real battle, Jeremiah knew, was just beginning. The transition from business class to economy was stark. The spacious leather seats and personal service gave way to cramped rows and a sea of passengers already settled in for the 3-hour flight. Patricia Wells, the gate manager, led Jeremiah down the narrow aisle where curious eyes tracked his movement. His tailored suit and executive demeanor stood out among the casually dressed economy passengers. "Here you are, Mr. Washington." 23C, Patricia said, gesturing to an aisle seat in the Economy Plus section. Her voice carried a forced cheerfulness that rang hollow after the confrontation. "The flight attendants will be available if you need anything." Jeremiah nodded silently, storing his briefcase in the overhead bin. As Patricia hurried back toward the front of the plane, a young flight attendant named Maya approached. "I'm so sorry about this, Mr. Washington," she whispered, leaning close while arranging items in the overhead compartment. "What they did wasn't right. I've documented the seat reassignment in my own notes." Before he could respond, Maya continued her duties, moving down the aisle. Jeremiah settled into seat 23C, next to a middle-aged black man who was reading Critical Race Theory, an introduction, with small round reading glasses perched on his nose. "I saw what happened," the man said quietly, marking his page and closing his book. "Thomas Johnson, history professor at Columbia." He extended his hand. "Jeremiah Washington," he replied, shaking the offered hand. "I know who you are," Thomas said with a knowing smile. "Your facial recognition software investment raised quite a few discussions in academic circles about algorithmic bias. Discussions we actively encouraged," Jeremiah noted. "Can't fix problems you're not willing to acknowledge." Thomas nodded appreciatively. "Precisely why I use your case study in my classes. What I just witnessed, though. That's a case study of a different kind, isn't it?" "One that's all too familiar," Jeremiah agreed, keeping his voice low. Around them, recognition was spreading. A young woman across the aisle was surreptitiously taking a photo. 2 rows ahead, a teenager was typing rapidly on his phone, occasionally glancing back at Jeremiah. "You're trending already," Thomas observed, nodding toward the teenager. "Social media moves faster than flight attendants." Jeremiah connected to the in-flight Wi-Fi, bypassing the paywall with his executive access code. His phone immediately lit up with messages from Aisha and his executive team. "Protocol Omega activated. Legal team standing by. Media contacts alerted but holding. Need full details and documentation." He began typing a comprehensive account of the incident, including names, times, and specific statements made. As he worked, Thomas quietly offered his own observations. "The captain never made eye contact with you. Classic dominance avoidance technique. And the way they surrounded you in the jetway, spatial power dynamics 101. Jeremiah appreciated the academic's analytical perspective. "Would you be willing to provide a witness statement?" "Already drafting it," Thomas confirmed, holding up his phone. "I've been documenting discrimination cases for 20 years. Never thought I'd be witnessing one involving a Fortune 500 CEO. Fortune 500 status doesn't provide as much immunity as people might think," Jeremiah replied. He paused his typing to reflect on previous incidents, the high-end car dealership where salespeople had ignored him until he mentioned his budget, the restaurant maitre d', who had tried to seat him by the kitchen despite his reservation, the countless times he'd been followed by security in luxury stores. Each time, he documented the experience meticulously, building what became Protocol Omega. A comprehensive response system for addressing discrimination without allowing it to derail his primary objectives. Around them, a subtle shift was occurring. Passengers who had initially stared were now offering supportive nods or expressions of concern. A flight attendant who wasn't Maya passed by without making eye contact, her body language tense. The cabin felt charged with awareness. Have you ever been in a situation where you were treated unfairly despite your qualifications or status? Comment number 1 if you've experienced discrimination that made you feel powerless, or number 2 if you've witnessed someone else being treated unjustly. Don't forget to like this video and subscribe to hear more stories about standing up against injustice. What do you think will happen next as Jeremiah's strategic response unfolds? Let's continue this incredible story. The captain's voice crackled over the intercom, making no mention of the incident as he welcomed passengers aboard Flight 247 to New York. The routine announcement felt jarringly disconnected from the tension in the cabin. Jeremiah continued documenting every detail while responding to updates from his team. His executive assistant had already rescheduled his New York meetings by an hour to accommodate any delays, his legal team was researching the airline's history of similar complaints, and his media team was monitoring social mentions, which were multiplying exponentially. Next to him, Thomas was engaged in his own documentation. In academia, he explained, we face our own version of this. I've been passed over for department chair 3 times despite having the strongest publication record. Each time, they cited nebulous concerns about my leadership style. Let me guess, Jeremiah said. Your white colleagues with similar or more direct styles face no such concerns. Precisely. They're authoritative while I'm intimidating, Thomas confirmed. A small alliance was forming among the passengers of color in nearby rows. A South Asian woman in 24B leaned forward to offer her own witness account. An older black couple across the aisle exchanged contact information with Thomas. The teenager who had been on his phone turned out to be a law student who offered his own detailed observations. Meanwhile, Jeremiah received an encrypted message from his research team. They had identified Trevor Whitman as a mid-level executive at Rexford Technologies, a direct competitor to Washington Innovations in certain market segments. The coincidence seemed increasingly suspicious. As the plane reached cruising altitude, Maya returned with the beverage cart. When she reached Jeremiah's row, she slipped him a note along with his sparkling water. Check your email, it read. Sent evidence from my personal account. Jeremiah opened his secure email to find a message containing a screenshot of the flight manifest. It clearly showed that his seat had been manually reassigned just 40 minutes before boarding, not by an automated system glitch as Patricia Wells had claimed. The notes section included the code VVIP accommodation requested by management. The pieces were falling into place. This wasn't a random incident or system error, it had been a deliberate decision. From the front of the plane, Jeremiah could see Brenda conferring with another flight attendant, both occasionally glancing toward economy class. Their body language suggested growing concern. They're realizing who you are, Thomas observed quietly. That shouldn't matter, Jeremiah replied. This shouldn't happen to anyone, regardless of their status. Agreed. But your status gives you the leverage to make that point in ways most of us can't. Jeremiah nodded, understanding the responsibility that came with his position. His phone buzzed with another update. His team had discovered that Trevor Whitman and Patricia Wells both belonged to the same country club in Houston. An exclusive establishment that had only recently begun accepting black members after a discrimination lawsuit. In business class, Brenda was now engaged in what appeared to be a tense conversation with Trevor Whitman, who was gesturing emphatically. Other business class passengers were watching the interaction with evident interest. Meanwhile, Captain Sullivan's voice came over the intercom again, this time requesting that Brenda come to the cockpit immediately. The carefully maintained illusion of normalcy was beginning to crack. Jeremiah received another update. The hashtag #CEOineconomy was trending nationally, with passengers' photos and videos spreading across multiple platforms. The airline's social media team had issued a brief statement. We are aware of a seating issue on Flight 247 and are investigating the matter. We take all customer concerns seriously. The anodyne corporate response was being met with ridicule online, especially as more details emerged from passengers posting in real time. "They've activated damage control mode," Jeremiah told Thomas, showing him the statement. "Too little, too late." Thomas nodded. The modern equivalent of closing the barn door after the horses have escaped. Social media has fundamentally altered the power dynamics of these encounters. Jeremiah looked around at the impromptu community that had formed in the economy cabin, people offering their observations, documenting their perspectives, sharing their own experiences with discrimination. In the midst of the injustice he'd experienced, there was something powerful in this collective witness. His phone buzzed again with a message from Aisha, Airline headquarters in crisis mode. CEO Jackson Williams personally involved now. Stock already down 3% on early trading as story spreads. Protocol Omega was working as designed, transforming a moment of humiliation into a leverage point for accountability. But for Jeremiah, this had never been about personal vindication. It was about changing systems that allowed such incidents to occur with impunity. As the flight continued toward New York, the balance of power was already shifting. The question now was how the airline would respond to the crisis they had created, and what consequences would follow for everyone involved. At 36,000 feet above the American heartland, a corporate crisis was unfolding in real time. Halfway through the 3-hour flight, the carefully maintained hierarchies and power structures of the airline industry were being exposed and upended. Jeremiah's research team had been working diligently since his first text. Through their network of contacts and database access, they had assembled a comprehensive dossier on Trevor Whitman. The picture that emerged was illuminating. Whitman was indeed a mid-level executive at Rexford Technologies, but his position was far less substantial than his demeanor suggested. As director of regional sales, he oversaw a team of 12 and had limited strategic influence, nothing close to Jeremiah's C-suite position. More interestingly, Rexford Technologies had recently lost a major bid to Washington Innovations for a government contract on data security infrastructure. The timing suggested more than coincidence. "Your competitor's stock dropped 8% after losing that contract," Thomas commented, having followed the updates on Jeremiah's phone. "Might explain Mr. Whitman's sense of entitlement to your seat. Petty revenge has a long history in corporate warfare." Jeremiah nodded. "The question is whether it was purely personal on his part, or if there's more to it." His question was soon partially answered when Maya returned, ostensibly to collect trash but actually to share more information. "I checked the system further," she whispered, leaning close as she took Jeremiah's empty cup. "Your seat was reassigned manually by Patricia Wells at the gate. She overrode the system's warnings about your status. That requires management authorization codes. Does Patricia Wells have that level of authority?" Jeremiah asked quietly. Maya shook her head. "Gate managers don't. Someone higher up had to approve it." As Maya moved on, Jeremiah relayed this information to his team. Within minutes, they responded with another piece of the puzzle. Patricia Wells had previously worked as an executive assistant at Rexford Technologies for 3 years before joining the airline. The connection to Trevor Whitman wasn't just the country club, they had a professional history. The implications were clear: this hadn't been a random incident or simple error. It had been a deliberate action targeting Jeremiah specifically, leveraging airline staff connections to execute what amounted to corporate harassment. The intersection of corporate rivalry and racial bias, Thomas observed. A particularly American phenomenon. Up in business class, the atmosphere had apparently shifted. Through the cabin divider, Jeremiah could see Brenda engaged in an animated conversation on the cabin phone. Her previously confident demeanor had given way to visible anxiety. Meanwhile, Trevor Whitman was being subjected to questioning glances from other business class passengers who had pieced together what had happened. Jeremiah's phone buzzed with updates from his media team. The story had exploded across all platforms. Financial news networks had picked it up, connecting it to broader issues of corporate ethics and discrimination. Civil rights organizations were issuing statements. The airline stock had continued its descent, now down nearly 5% as investors reacted to the potential public relations disaster. "They're scrambling," Aisha texted. "Airline HQ has tried to contact us through 3 different channels. Their legal team is requesting direct communication to resolve the situation amicably." "No direct communication until we land," Jeremiah responded. "Everything on record from this point forward." His strategy was deliberate. Any private conversation could be misrepresented later. Public accountability was essential, not just for his situation, but for the broader pattern it represented. Dorothy, the elderly woman who had been seated across from Jeremiah in business class, appeared at his row, making her way down the economy aisle with the assistance of her cane. "Young man," she said, her voice carrying naturally, "I just wanted to check if you're all right. What they did to you wasn't right, and I told that flight attendant as much." Her public show of support drew attention from surrounding passengers, many of whom nodded in agreement. "I appreciate your concern, Miss Dorothy," Jeremiah replied warmly. "I'm doing fine." "Well, I've lived long enough to recognize injustice when I see it," she continued. "My grandson Darius says your company is one of the few that treats its black employees right. Says you've got real policies, not just talk." The mention of policies triggered a realization in Jeremiah. He turned to Thomas. "The airline uses our software for their booking system. The contract is up for renewal next quarter." Thomas raised an eyebrow. "Now that is leverage." Jeremiah nodded. "More importantly, we've built anti-discrimination algorithms into our latest version, designed to flag patterns of bias in customer service decisions. They've been dragging their feet on the upgrade. I imagine they'll suddenly find that upgrade quite appealing," Thomas remarked dryly. The cabin phone at the front of economy rang, and Maya answered it. After a brief conversation, she made her way to Jeremiah's seat. "Mr. Washington," she said professionally, though loud enough for nearby passengers to hear, "Captain Sullivan has asked if you would be willing to speak with him. He can come to you, or provide access to the flight deck, whichever you prefer." The captain's unusual offer. Leaving the cockpit to speak with a passenger or inviting a passenger into the restricted flight deck area, revealed the escalating concern among the flight crew. "Please inform Captain Sullivan that I'm comfortable where I am," Jeremiah replied evenly. "If he wishes to speak with me, he's welcome to come to economy class." Maya nodded and returned to relay the message. Minutes later, an unprecedented scene unfolded as Captain Sullivan emerged from the cockpit and made his way down the length of the aircraft to economy. His presence drew stares and whispers from passengers throughout the cabin. The captain stopped at Jeremiah's row, his tall frame awkward in the confined space of the economy aisle. "Mr. Washington," he began, his tone markedly different from their jetway interaction, "I wanted to personally express my regrets about the seating situation. We have business class accommodations available for you if you'd like to relocate for the remainder of the flight." Jeremiah regarded him steadily. "Thank you, Captain Sullivan, but I'll remain where the airline has placed me. I wouldn't want to cause any further disruption to the flight." Sullivan's discomfort was evident. "I understand, sir. If there's anything else we can do to make your journey more comfortable, please don't hesitate to ask." "Actually, there is one thing," Jeremiah said. "I'd appreciate written confirmation from you regarding the circumstances of my removal from business class, including who authorized it and on what grounds." The captain hesitated, clearly caught between corporate protocol and the growing public relations crisis. "I'll see what I can do," he finally replied, before retreating toward the front of the aircraft. As Sullivan made his way back, Jeremiah received another update from his team. Airline CEO Jackson Williams has left an emergency board meeting and is reportedly flying to JFK personally. ETA before our landing. The situation had escalated beyond anything the airline had anticipated. What they had likely viewed as a minor accommodation for one connected passenger had transformed into a corporate crisis reaching the highest levels of management. In the aftermath of the captain's visit, Maya returned once more, this time with a handwritten note, internal emails flying. They've realized your company owns the software they use for their entire booking system. Patricia Wells has been pulled from gate duties. Trevor Whitman is being pressured to move seats but is refusing. The power dynamics had shifted dramatically. What had begun as an exercise of privilege against Jeremiah was now rebounding on those responsible. The systems designed to protect status and privilege were being turned inside out, exposing the mechanisms of bias that normally operated invisibly. The question now, Thomas said thoughtfully, is what kind of resolution would actually address the structural issues, not just your individual case. Jeremiah nodded. That's always been the real challenge. Individual apologies don't change systems. As the flight began its initial descent toward New York, Jeremiah received one final update before the requirement to switch phones to airplane mode, a message from his team with a link to a live shot from JFK Airport, where reporters had already gathered at the gate area. The airline's most routine domestic flight had become national news, and the ripples were only beginning to spread. As Flight 247 began its descent toward JFK International Airport, the atmosphere inside the aircraft had transformed. What had started as a routine domestic flight was now the centerpiece of a national conversation about race, privilege, and corporate accountability. The power dynamics that had seemed so firmly established during boarding had undergone a seismic shift. 2 hours into the flight, Captain Sullivan's voice came over the intercom, his tone noticeably different from his earlier announcements. Ladies and gentlemen, we're beginning our initial descent into the New York area. Local time is 1:45 p.m. with clear skies and a temperature of 72 degrees. We also, request that Mr. Jeremiah Washington please speak with a member of our cabin crew at his convenience. Thank you. The public acknowledgement of Jeremiah by name. Extremely unusual in standard flight protocols, signaled the airline's growing desperation to establish communication before landing. Passengers throughout the cabin turned to look at him, many offering supportive nods or thumbs-up gestures. Maya approached his seat shortly after the announcement. Mr. Washington, I've been asked to convey the captain's request for a conversation before landing. Thank you, Maya, Jeremiah replied calmly. Please inform Captain Sullivan that I'm happy to speak with airline representatives upon arrival at the gate. Maya nodded, understanding the strategic value of his decision. I'll let him know. She lowered her voice before continuing. Just so you're aware, they've been on the satellite phone with headquarters non-stop. Your name is being mentioned in every conversation. As Maya returned to the front of the cabin, Thomas leaned over. They're trying to contain this before you step off the plane and speak to the media. Standard crisis management, Jeremiah agreed. Resolve privately, control the narrative, minimize exposure. His phone lit up with a final message before the mandatory electronics shutdown. JFK ground crew reports airline executives on tarmac. CEO Jackson Williams arrived by private jet. Media presence substantial. Throughout the cabin, passengers were busy with their phones, many clearly discussing or posting about the situation. The teenager who had been documenting the incident leaned across the aisle. Sir, your story has hit all the major networks. #CEO in economy and #business class while black are trending number 1 and 2 nationally. Jeremiah thanked him for the update. The scale of attention didn't surprise him. Protocol Omega had been designed to maximize visibility once activated. But the speed of escalation reflected how his personal experience had tapped into a broader current of recognition and frustration. Brenda appeared in economy class, making her way determinedly toward Jeremiah's seat. Her previously dismissive demeanor had been replaced by barely concealed anxiety. Mr. Washington, she began, her voice carrying a forced pleasantness, Captain Sullivan would like to personally invite you to return to business class for landing. We have your original seat, 2A, available for you. The offer presented a clear attempt to visually diminish the incident before arrival. If Jeremiah deplaned from business class, the optics of discrimination would be less stark for waiting media. "I appreciate the offer," he replied, loud enough for nearby passengers to hear, "but I'll remain where the airline has placed me. I wouldn't want to cause any further disruption." Brenda's professional facade cracked slightly. "Sir, we're trying to make this right." "The time for that was before boarding," Jeremiah observed calmly. "Now it's time for accountability." As Brenda returned to the front, visibly flustered, Dorothy made her way back from the lavatory, stopping at Jeremiah's row. "That's right, young man," she said approvingly. "My father always said, don't accept the apology before they've admitted what they're sorry for." Her comment drew murmurs of agreement from surrounding passengers. The community that had formed an economy, diverse in age, race, and background, had coalesced around a shared recognition of the injustice they had witnessed. As the plane descended through 10,000 feet, the seatbelt signs illuminated. An unusual tension filled the cabin, not the normal pre-landing activities, but the anticipation of what would happen once the aircraft reached the gate. What happened next was unprecedented in commercial aviation protocol. The cockpit door opened, and Captain Sullivan emerged once more. During active descent, a phase when pilots typically remained firmly at the controls, he made his way directly to economy class. The breach of standard procedure signaled the extraordinary pressure being applied by airline management. Stopping at Jeremiah's row, Sullivan addressed him with newfound deference. "Mr. Washington, I need to speak with you privately before we land. It's a matter of considerable importance." "Whatever needs to be said can be said here," Jeremiah replied, gesturing to the passengers around him who had witnessed the entire sequence of events. Sullivan lowered his voice, though in the confined cabin space, his words remained audible to nearby rows. "Sir, I've been informed that you hold significant stock in our airline and sit on the boards of several companies we rely on for critical operations." "That's correct," Jeremiah confirmed. "Including the software company that provides your entire booking and operations system." The captain's face paled slightly. The implications were dawning on him. This wasn't just about one passenger or one flight, but potentially about the airline's entire technological infrastructure. Given that relationship, Sullivan continued, choosing his words carefully, "We'd like the opportunity to address this situation appropriately before it escalates further." "It escalated the moment your staff decided to remove me from my confirmed seat based on what appears to be racial bias and corporate favoritism," Jeremiah responded. "The appropriate response now isn't damage control, it's structural change." Sullivan seemed at a loss for words, caught between corporate directives and the reality of the situation he now faced. Thomas spoke up from the adjacent seat. "Captain, I believe FAA regulations require you to be in the cockpit during descent below 10,000 feet unless there's an emergency. Is there an emergency we should be aware of?" The pointed reminder of aviation regulations forced Sullivan's retreat. "We'll continue this discussion after landing, Mr. Washington." As the captain returned to the cockpit, the aircraft continued its approach to JFK. Through the window, Jeremiah could see the sprawling airport coming into view. His phone, now in airplane mode, contained all the documentation and communication necessary for what would happen next. The senior flight attendant's voice came over the intercom, instructing passengers to prepare for landing. The standard announcement concluded with an unusual addendum: "We also ask that all passengers remain seated after arrival until further announcements are made." The attempt to control passenger movement, likely to prevent media access, was another sign of the airline's growing panic. Jeremiah exchanged glances with Thomas, who raised an eyebrow at the announcement. "They're trying to manage the optics now." "Too late for that." "Far too late," Jeremiah agreed. As the aircraft touched down and taxied toward the terminal, an extraordinary sight became visible through the windows. Instead of the standard ground crew, a cluster of dark-suited executives stood waiting on the tarmac. Among them, a distinguished man in his 60s. Recognizable from financial news as Jackson Williams, the airline CEO, paced anxiously, periodically checking his watch. "That's not standard welcome protocol," Thomas observed dryly. "No," Jeremiah agreed. That's fear. The plane came to a stop some distance from the terminal, another unusual procedure that suggested an attempt to control access and visibility. Captain Sullivan's voice came over the intercom once more. Ladies and gentlemen, we've arrived at JFK International Airport. Local time is 2:17 p.m. We've parked at a remote stand due to, gate congestion. We ask that all passengers remain seated temporarily while we arrange transportation to the terminal. The transparent attempt to isolate the aircraft from waiting media and control the narrative drew mutters of disbelief throughout the cabin. Jeremiah's phone lit up immediately as passengers reactivated their devices. Messages flooded in from his team, confirming what was already evident. The airline was in full crisis mode, with their stock now down nearly 8% as the story continued to spread. Jeremiah remained seated, his expression calm. The confrontation in the jetway had been merely the opening move. The real reckoning was about to begin. The aircraft sat motionless on the tarmac, an island of tension amid JFK's bustling operations. Through the windows, passengers could see the unusual welcoming committee, a cluster of airline executives standing in tight formation, their body language betraying their anxiety. Behind them, a fleet of shuttle buses had been hastily arranged, presumably to transport passengers to the terminal while bypassing the media presence at the gate. Inside the cabin, the atmosphere had transformed. What had begun as a routine flight had become a crucible for issues far larger than a seating dispute. Passengers who would normally be rushing to collect their belongings and exit remained seated, many openly recording the unfolding situation on their phones. Captain Sullivan's voice came over the intercom once more. Ladies and gentlemen, we apologize for the slight delay. We're arranging for deplaning at this remote stand. We ask for your patience and cooperation as we... He was interrupted by a chorus of objections from throughout the cabin. We want to go to the regular gate, someone called out. This is ridiculous, added another voice. Thomas Johnson stood up from his seat beside Jeremiah. As a passenger, I formally request that this aircraft proceed to its assigned gate as scheduled. There is no operational reason for this delay. His authoritative academic tone inspired others to join in. Within moments, a unified demand had formed among the passengers, cutting across racial and socio-economic lines. The spontaneous solidarity surprised even Jeremiah, who had witnessed many forms of public reaction throughout his career. Maya, the supportive flight attendant, approached Captain Sullivan at the front of the cabin. Though their conversation wasn't audible, her body language suggested she was conveying the passenger's sentiment. Sullivan's rigid posture indicated his discomfort with the developing situation. Meanwhile, Jeremiah's phone was exploding with notifications. Every major news outlet was covering the story. Video clips from passengers were going viral across platforms. His team had compiled a comprehensive dossier on everyone involved in the incident, including previously reported discrimination complaints against the airline that established a pattern of behavior. CNN, MSNBC, and Fox are all running the story, Aisha texted. Your PR statement is ready for approval. Jeremiah reviewed the carefully crafted statement his team had prepared, one that focused not on his personal experience but on the systemic issues it highlighted and the changes needed to address them. After approving the statement, he turned to Thomas. Would you be willing to help organize passenger statements? The more documented accounts we have, the harder this will be to dismiss. Already on it, Thomas confirmed, showing Jeremiah his phone where he'd created a shared document for passengers to record their observations. I've got 20 people contributing already. Nothing like a professor organizing group work. The standoff continued for several minutes until Sullivan emerged from the cockpit again, this time to confer with the senior cabin crew. Whatever resolution they reached became apparent when the aircraft suddenly lurched forward, resuming its taxi toward the terminal. A spontaneous cheer erupted from the economy section. The small victory energized the cabin, creating an even stronger sense of shared purpose among the passengers who had witnessed the day's events. As they approached the gate, an unprecedented scene became visible through the windows. News crews had gathered in substantial numbers. Airport security personnel formed a loose perimeter, but they were clearly unprepared for the media presence that had materialized in response to the viral story. The aircraft came to a stop at the jet bridge, and Sullivan made a final announcement: "Ladies and gentlemen, we have arrived at Gate 32. We ask that all passengers remain seated temporarily while we coordinate deplaning procedures." The request went largely unheeded as passengers began collecting their belongings. The unified front that had formed during the remote stand confrontation remained intact. Passengers were no longer willing to comply with directives they perceived as attempts to manage optics rather than provide service. An unusual commotion at the front of the aircraft drew attention. The door had opened, but instead of the standard ground crew, Airline CEO Jackson Williams himself had boarded the plane. His presence in the cabin, virtually unheard of in normal operations, signaled the crisis level the situation had reached. Williams made his way directly toward economy class, flanked by two corporate executives. His target was clear: he needed to speak with Jeremiah before the situation escalated further. "Mr. Washington," Williams began when he reached Jeremiah's row, his voice pitched to project warmth and concern. "I'm Jackson Williams, CEO of the airline. I wanted to personally apologize for the unfortunate misunderstanding today and assure you that this does not reflect our company's values or protocols." Jeremiah regarded him steadily. "Mr. Williams, I appreciate you coming personally, but characterizing racial discrimination and corporate favoritism as an unfortunate misunderstanding suggests you don't fully grasp the situation." Williams glanced uncomfortably at the passengers openly recording the interaction on their phones. "Perhaps we could continue this conversation somewhere more private. I have a car waiting, and we can discuss appropriate compensation and resolution." "I prefer to have this conversation with witnesses present," Jeremiah replied. "Transparency is essential when addressing systemic issues." The CEO's carefully maintained expression flickered briefly. "Mr. Washington, we're prepared to offer substantial compensation for your inconvenience today. Our customer experience team has prepared a comprehensive package including flight vouchers, status upgrades, and I'm not interested in personal compensation," Jeremiah interrupted. "This isn't about me getting special treatment after the fact. It's about changing the systems that allowed this to happen in the first place." Thomas Johnson spoke up from beside him. "Perhaps Mr. Williams would be interested to know that we've collected statements from 28 passengers so far, all documenting today's events in detail." Williams's discomfort visibly increased. He was losing control of a situation he had likely assumed could be managed with the usual tactics: private apologies, financial incentives, and confidentiality agreements. "What exactly are you looking for, Mr. Washington?" he asked, his tone sharpening slightly. "Accountability and structural change," Jeremiah replied. "Starting with a full investigation into the relationship between your gate manager Patricia Wells and Trevor Whitman, including any previous incidents of preferential treatment or discrimination." The specificity of the request caught Williams off guard. Before he could respond, Jeremiah continued. "Additionally, I think your board would be interested to know that Washington Innovations, my company, owns the proprietary software your entire booking system runs on. Our contract comes up for renewal next quarter." The implications landed with visible impact. Williams paled slightly as he processed the multiple levels of leverage Jeremiah possessed, not just the public relations crisis and potential legal action, but actual operational control over systems the airline relied on daily. "I see," Williams said after a moment. "Perhaps we should discuss this more thoroughly." "I agree," Jeremiah nodded. "My team will be in touch to arrange a meeting with your board. In the meantime, I suggest you prepare a more substantive public response than unfortunate misunderstanding. The videos are already trending." As if to underscore his point, a notification appeared on Jeremiah's phone: airline stock now down 12% as trading volume spikes. Board members demanding emergency meeting. Williams recognized the shift in power dynamics. What had begun as an attempt to remove one passenger from business class had escalated into a corporate crisis threatening his leadership and the company's financial stability. "We'll issue a more comprehensive statement immediately," he conceded. "And I'll personally ensure a thorough investigation." "I look forward to seeing the results," Jeremiah replied. "Now, if you'll excuse me, I have a meeting to attend in New York." As Williams retreated toward the front of the aircraft, passengers began to deplane. The scene at the gate was chaotic, news crews attempting to capture footage, airline representatives trying to maintain order, and passengers eager to share their perspectives. Thomas Johnson shook Jeremiah's hand before they parted. "You've turned an act of discrimination into a catalyst for change. Not many people have the platform or resources to do that. Which is exactly why those of us who do have the responsibility to use it," Jeremiah replied. Outside the secure area, Jeremiah found his executive team waiting. Aisha stepped forward, tablet in hand. "The merger meeting has been pushed back an hour, as requested. Legal has the documentation from the flight. PR has scheduled a press conference for 4 p.m. if you want to make a statement." "Schedule it," Jeremiah confirmed. "This isn't over yet." As they walked toward the waiting car, Jeremiah glanced at his phone one last time. A new notification had appeared: Trevor Whitman placed on administrative leave by Rexford Technologies pending investigation into conduct unbecoming a company representative. The first dominoes were already falling. By transforming his individual experience into a public referendum on corporate behavior and racial bias, Jeremiah had initiated a cascade of accountability that would be difficult to contain or control. The real work, the structural changes he sought, still lay ahead. But the groundwork had been laid for a reckoning that extended far beyond a disputed airline seat. The press conference outside JFK's Terminal 4 became an instant media phenomenon. Against the backdrop of arriving and departing flights, Jeremiah Washington stood before a forest of microphones, his composed demeanor contrasting sharply with the gravity of his message. He had changed from his travel suit into a fresh one brought by his team, midnight blue with a subtle pattern, projecting authority without ostentation. "What happened today on Flight 247 is not about one seat or one passenger," he began, his voice measured and clear. "It represents a pattern of behavior that affects countless travelers who don't have the platform to speak out. The issue isn't that I, personally, was moved to economy class. The issue is the systemic bias that informed that decision and the corporate culture that enabled it." The assembled journalists captured every word, aware they were witnessing a masterclass in addressing discrimination. Jeremiah neither raised his voice nor displayed anger, yet his words carried unmistakable moral authority. "Washington Innovations will be working with airline leadership to implement meaningful changes to their training, protocols, and accountability systems. We're not interested in punitive measures, but in transformative ones. The goal isn't to punish one company, but to create a model that others can follow." As Jeremiah spoke, financial news tickers displayed the real-time impact of the controversy. The airline stock had plummeted nearly 15% by market close, erasing over $2 billion in value in a single day. #BoycottAirline continued trending worldwide, with travelers sharing their own experiences of discrimination and pledging to take their business elsewhere. Meanwhile, a parallel drama was unfolding at Rexford Technologies. Trevor Whitman's involvement had created a secondary crisis for the company already struggling after losing the government contract to Washington Innovations. By early evening, Rexford issued a terse statement: "Rexford Technologies has terminated the employment of Trevor Whitman, effective immediately. The company categorically condemns discrimination in all forms and will cooperate fully with any investigation into today's events. Mr. Whitman's actions were taken without company knowledge or approval and do not reflect our values or business practices." The swift termination reflected corporate America's growing recognition that association with explicit bias carried significant reputational and financial risks. What might have been quietly managed just years earlier now demanded immediate and decisive action. At the airline's headquarters, the response was equally dramatic though less public. Patricia Wells, the gate manager implicated in the seat reassignment, had been placed on administrative leave pending investigation. Internal emails, later leaked to the press, revealed frantic communications among executives as they attempted to contain the spreading crisis. Jeremiah's legal team, working in conjunction with civil rights organizations, had begun the process of documenting similar incidents across the airline's history. Their preliminary findings indicated a troubling pattern. Complaints of discriminatory treatment had been systematically downplayed or dismissed, with minimal consequences for those involved. The merger meeting that had been the original purpose of Jeremiah's trip proceeded with an unexpected advantage. News of the incident had reached his negotiating counterparts, subtly altering the power dynamics in the room. His calm handling of the highly public confrontation had enhanced his reputation for grace under pressure. A quality highly valued in potential business partners. "You've had quite a day," remarked the CEO of Davis and Powell as they concluded the successful negotiations. "Most people would have been too rattled to focus on business after something like that. Discrimination isn't a new experience for me or for most people who look like me," Jeremiah replied. "The difference is having the platform to address it systemically rather than just personally." By evening, Jeremiah met with his expanded team at their New York offices. The sleek conference room overlooking Manhattan's skyline hosted an unusual gathering: his executive staff, legal advisors, diversity consultants, and, most surprisingly, Thomas Johnson, the history professor who had sat beside him in economy class. "Professor Johnson has agreed to consult on the development of our response," Jeremiah explained to the group. His academic expertise in patterns of institutional discrimination provides valuable historical context. Thomas nodded appreciatively. "What we witness today connects directly to my research on how discrimination adapts to legal and social constraints, becoming less explicit but no less impactful." The meeting produced a comprehensive strategy document that went far beyond addressing the day's incident. Washington Innovations announced the development of a new AI system designed to detect and prevent discriminatory patterns in service industries, building on their existing booking software to add layers of accountability and transparency. "We're turning this incident into an opportunity for innovation," Aisha explained to the team. "The Washington Protocol will establish new standards for identifying bias in customer service algorithms and human decision-making." The announcement of this initiative triggered immediate interest from competing airlines, eager to demonstrate their commitment to equitable treatment. By midnight, 3 major carriers had reached out about potential partnerships, seeking to implement the system before they faced similar crises. As these corporate developments unfolded, individual accountability continued to spread. Captain Sullivan, whose initial avoidance of eye contact with Jeremiah had been noted by multiple passengers, requested a private meeting through intermediaries. "I'm not proud of how I handled the situation," he admitted when they finally spoke. "There was pressure from management to accommodate certain passengers without questions, but that doesn't excuse my actions." His candor revealed another dimension of the systemic issues at play. The pressures placed on employees to maintain hierarchies of privilege without explicitly acknowledging their nature. "The system is designed to provide plausible deniability," Thomas Johnson observed when Jeremiah related this conversation. "Everyone can claim they were just following protocol, while the discriminatory outcomes persist." Perhaps the most unexpected development came from Maya, the flight attendant who had secretly provided evidence of the manual seat reassignment. She had been identified by airline management through the cabin crew roster and called in for questioning, ostensibly about breaching customer privacy. Before any disciplinary action could be taken, however, Jeremiah's team had already reached out with a job offer: diversity coordinator for Washington Innovations' new airline consulting division. Her insider knowledge of crew procedures and willingness to stand against injustice made her uniquely qualified for the role. The final corporate domino fell during an emergency meeting of the airline's board of directors. After hours of closed-door discussions, and facing pressure from major shareholders concerned about the stock price collapse, the board emerged with a statement. The board announces the early retirement of CEO Jackson Williams, effective immediately. This transition allows fresh leadership to address recent challenges and implement comprehensive reforms to ensure all passengers receive equitable treatment regardless of race, gender, or background. The careful wording couldn't disguise the reality. Williams had been forced out, his position untenable after the public relations disaster and his failed attempt to personally manage Jeremiah's case. His early retirement at age 63 represented the highest level accountability yet for the day's events. As Jeremiah prepared for bed in his New York hotel suite, he received one final update from Aisha. The airline's largest institutional investor had requested a private meeting to discuss Washington Innovation's potentially taking a board seat as part of a corporate governance overhaul. "They're offering us a literal seat at the table," Aisha noted. "Ironic," Jeremiah replied, considering how the day began. The symmetry wasn't lost on either of them. What had started with the unjust removal from one seat had culminated in an invitation to occupy another, one with far greater influence over systemic change. 1 month later, Jeremiah Washington stood at the floor-to-ceiling windows of his New York office, gazing at the Manhattan skyline bathed in late afternoon sunlight. On the large screen mounted on the wall, a financial news network provided a steady backdrop of market updates and corporate developments. The anchor's voice cut through Jeremiah's reflection. Airline shares have rebounded following the implementation of their comprehensive new anti-discrimination policies, now being called the most robust in the industry. The recovery comes after last month's viral incident involving tech CEO Jeremiah Washington, which led to a major corporate shakeup and the resignation of former CEO Jackson Williams. Jeremiah turned from the window as Aisha entered the office, tablet in hand. "The Washington Protocol is officially being adopted by 2 more airlines today," she reported, referencing the framework that had emerged from the incident. "That makes 5 major carriers and 3 hotel chains in just 4 weeks. And our software integration?" Jeremiah asked. "The first phase is live across 60% of their network. The bias detection algorithms are already flagging patterns that would have gone unnoticed before." She scrolled through her tablet. For instance, business class upgrades were going disproportionately to white male passengers even when other travelers had higher loyalty status or earlier check-in times. Jeremiah nodded thoughtfully. "The pattern is always in the data if you're willing to look for it." The protocol they had developed wasn't simply a response to his personal experience, it was a comprehensive system for identifying, addressing, and preventing discriminatory practices throughout the travel industry. By leveraging Washington Innovation's position as a key software provider, they had created accountability mechanisms that companies couldn't easily circumvent or ignore. "The foundation paperwork is finalized," Aisha continued, referencing the organization Jeremiah had established to support Black entrepreneurs facing discrimination. "The board approved your recommendation for Thomas Johnson as the first executive director." Thomas had proven to be not just an academic observer but a strategic thinker whose historical perspective informed practical solutions. His transition from Columbia professor to foundation director represented the kind of cross-sector collaboration Jeremiah believed was essential for lasting change. "And Maya?" Jeremiah asked. "Thriving in her new role. The airline tried to lure her back with a promotion, but she declined. Said she prefers working somewhere her ethics aren't in conflict with her job description." The former flight attendant had become an unexpected asset in developing the Washington Protocol, her frontline experience providing insights that might otherwise have been missed by executives and engineers. On Jeremiah's desk, a small notification appeared on his digital calendar, 4:30 p.m., meeting with MBA students, Harvard Business Club. It was one of several such engagements he had accepted in recent weeks, sharing the experience as a teaching case for future business leaders. "Your car is waiting whenever you're ready," Aisha noted, seeing him check the time. "The students are particularly interested in how you balance the personal and systemic aspects of your response." "That's always the challenge, isn't it?" Jeremiah reflected. Addressing the individual incident while not losing sight of the larger patterns it represents. As he gathered his materials for the presentation, a final news alert appeared on the office screen. breaking, Airline announces appointment of Michael Freeman as new CEO, becoming the first black chief executive in the company's 78-year history. Jeremiah and Aisha exchanged a meaningful glance. Freeman was a respected industry veteran who had previously been passed over for leadership positions despite his stellar track record. Representation matters, Aisha observed, but only when it comes with actual power to change systems. Exactly, Jeremiah agreed. This was never about getting me personally back to business class. It was about changing who gets a seat at every table. 2 days later, Jeremiah found himself boarding another flight. This time on the same airline that had been at the center of the controversy. The experience was markedly different from his previous journey. As he approached the aircraft door, the entire crew stood at attention, with the new CEO Michael Freeman personally waiting to greet him. "Mr. Washington," Freeman said, extending his hand. "Your seat in 2A is ready, though I believe we've made some improvements since your last flight with us." The subtle acknowledgement of the incident, and the changes it had precipitated, reflected the professional respect between two leaders who understood both the personal and institutional dimensions of the struggle for equity. As Jeremiah settled into his seat, the pilot's voice came over the intercom with a special welcome for the passenger whose courage and leadership has helped transform our industry. The announcement drew spontaneous applause from business class and economy passengers alike, many of whom recognized both the man and the movement his experience had catalyzed. The satisfaction Jeremiah felt wasn't about personal vindication or the restored comfort of business class. It was the deeper fulfillment of seeing structural change begin to take root, changes that would benefit countless travelers who didn't have his platform or resources to demand accountability. As the aircraft lifted into the sky, Jeremiah reflected on the journey that had brought him to this moment. From the south side of Chicago to MIT, from a startup founder to a Fortune 500 CEO, he had navigated systems designed to exclude people who looked like him. Each barrier had strengthened his resolve not just to succeed personally, but to transform the very structures that created those barriers. The incident on Flight 247 had been just one moment in that longer journey, a moment when individual discrimination had intersected with his capacity to demand systemic change. The real victory wasn't getting his seat back. It was creating a world where others wouldn't lose theirs in the first place. Jeremiah Washington's story teaches us that true leadership isn't about personal vindication but systemic transformation. When faced with discrimination, he strategically documented everything, leveraged his position thoughtfully, and focused on changing systems rather than seeking personal compensation. He recognized that individual incidents connect to larger patterns of bias that affect countless others without his resources or platform. The Washington Protocol demonstrates how accountability can be built into corporate structures. By focusing on data and patterns rather than intentions, Jeremiah created objective measures that made discrimination harder to dismiss or deny. His approach shows that effective change requires both immediate accountability and long-term structural reforms. Perhaps most importantly, this story reveals the power of community. From Thomas Johnson's academic perspective to Maya's insider knowledge to Dorothy's moral support, diverse allies strengthen Jeremiah's position. When individual experiences become collective action, transformation becomes possible at every level. The ultimate lesson isn't about getting your seat back, it's about expanding who gets a seat at the table in the first place. What moment in this story resonated most with you? Have you ever witnessed or experienced discrimination and wished you had tools to address it systematically? Share your thoughts in the comments below. If this story inspired you to think differently about addressing injustice, please hit that like button and subscribe for more powerful stories about overcoming adversity. Don't forget to share with someone who might need this message today. Thank you for joining this important conversation about creating a more equitable world. Together, we can transform individual challenges into collective progress.